and on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, and of the abominations of the earth. Revelation 17, 3-5. This symbolic language describes an impure, adulterous woman, the false church, or that part of Christianity that has been unfaithful to Christ and has compromised in its relationship to the world. James used similar words to describe those who forsake God's teachings and join the world. You adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? James 4:4. A fallen woman, then, represents a false church, and a pure woman represents a pure church. Let's look again at the prophecy of the pure woman. She being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Revelation 12:2-4. Who is this dragon that stood before the woman to devour her child as soon as he was born? And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Revelation 12:7-9. Revelation also describes the child. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. Revelation 12:5. Only one child in the history of the world was to rule all nations with a rod of iron and be caught up to God and his throne, and that was Jesus. Speaking of the second coming of Christ, John said, Out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that with it he should strike the nations, and he himself will rule them with a rod of iron. Revelation 19:15. Paul tells us how Jesus was caught up to God's throne when God raised him from the dead and set him at his own right hand in the heavenly place. Ephesians 1:20. The war that began in heaven moved to our world. Working through pagan Rome, Satan tried to take Jesus' life as soon as he was born. Herod, the Roman governor, decreed that all male children 2 years and under should be killed. But an angel warned Mary and Joseph to escape with Jesus into Egypt. The devil dogged Jesus' steps throughout his ministry, hoping to block God's plan to save our fallen world. As Christ's body hung on the cross, Satan thought he had won the battle. But an empty tomb was Satan's certain defeat. Christ arose and ascended to his Father's throne. The prophecy was on schedule, just as predicted. Failing in his attempt to destroy God's Son, Satan turned his wrath on the woman, or the Christian church. All but one of Christ's disciples died a martyr's death, and the Apostle Paul was beheaded outside the walls of Rome. Christians were tortured and thrown into dungeons, many sealing their testimony with their blood. As long as the disciples were alive, the church stood firmly for the truth. But with second and third generation Christians came compromise and apostasy. Toward the latter end of the 2nd century, most of the churches assumed a new form. The first simplicity disappeared as the old disciples retired to their graves. Ecclesiastical Research, page 51. In the 4th century, Emperor Constantine tried to hold the Roman Empire together by uniting pagans and Christians into one great system of religion. As a result, Christianity lost much of its old stigma, becoming in fact very popular. Heathen people were baptized into the church and brought many of their pagan beliefs and practices with them. One historian wrote, "The new Christians were, as far as thinking and habits went, the same old pagans. Their surge into the churches did not wipe out paganism. On the contrary, hordes of baptized pagans meant that paganism had diluted the moral energies of organized Christianity to the point of impotence." Centuries of Christianity, A Concise History, page 58. However, during this time, many Christians remained faithful to God's truths and protested the changes that had crept into the church. They refused to compromise their position, and many were persecuted for their stand. Soon the Roman emperors issued edicts, making it a crime punishable by death to reject the false practices of the state church. Historian Archibald Bauer writes, "Great numbers were driven from their habitations with their wives and children, stripped and naked, and many of them were inhumanely massacred." The History of the Popes, Volume 2, page 334. Foreseeing it all, John wrote, "The dragon persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child." Revelation 12:13. And what happened to the woman? She fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Revelation 12:6. Notice that God tells the time that his people were to be persecuted. 1,260 days. We have already discovered that each day in Bible prophecy stands for a year of literal time. Ezekiel wrote, "I have appointed thee each day for a year." Ezekiel 4:6. So the oppression of God's faithful people, as predicted in Revelation, was to continue for 1,260 years. History accurately confirms this Bible prophecy. Roman Emperor Justinian ordered the Roman general Belisarius to wipe out 3 Arian powers that opposed the church in Rome. The last of these powers was eliminated in A.D. 538, and Justinian declared the Bishop of Rome to be the head of the church, the true and effectual corrector of heretics. The reign of intolerance for so-called heretics began. And faithful Christians who continued to cherish the truths revealed in God's Word found that the only way to preserve their faith was to flee, just as Revelation predicted. The woman fled into the wilderness. The Waldenses, Albigenses, Huguenots, and other faithful Christians fled to the Alps in northern Italy and southern France, settling in secluded valleys, remote caves, and high mountains. They were hunted down as common criminals, and many were slain. Their crime? They would not give up the teachings of Jesus. Millions of Christians died rather than compromise their faith. Some historians estimate the death toll to be as high as 50 million. And many of those who died were martyred by other professed Christians who believed they were doing the will of God. God's truth finally triumphed. The Bible, long chained to monastery walls and cathedral pulpits, was translated into the language of the common people and scattered throughout the world. No longer was God's truth to be hidden. It was now to be revealed. Courageous reformers boldly proclaimed God's Word. Some, like Huss and Jerome, were burned at the stake. Others, like Luther, Wycliffe, and Tyndale, were hunted and persecuted. However, with the discovery of America, new freedom and a new refuge were provided for the persecuted Christians of Europe. On the shores of a newborn nation was laid the foundation of civil and religious liberty. France commemorated America's freedom by presenting the Statue of Liberty to the people of the United States. The era of compromise and persecution predicted in Revelation 12 finally came to an end in 1798, when the atheistic government of Napoleon sent General Berthier to take the Pope captive, exactly 1,260 years after the period of persecution began in 538. At the end of the 18th century, when this prophetic time period came to a close, God still had a group of faithful believers who clung to the Bible and its teachings. The prophecy foretold that Satan turned his fury upon the church of God that remained after this prophetic period. The dragon was wroth or angry with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Revelation 12:17. A remnant, for anyone acquainted with fabrics, is the last piece of